The early morning darkness over Betio Island erupted into chaos on November 20th, 1943. Thunder rolled across the lagoon as massive naval guns opened fire. Battleships Maryland and Colorado unleashed their fury upon Japanese positions. 16-inch shells screamed overhead. Each explosion shook the tiny coral atoll. Smoke and debris filled the air. In the shallow waters of Tarawa Atoll, Marines from the 2nd Division struggled forward. Chest-deep water surrounded them on all sides. Their landing craft sat grounded on coral reefs. 500 yards of killing water stretched between them and the beach. Every step forward brought new danger. Staff Sergeant William Bordelon gripped his waterproof equipment bag. Inside were demolition charges that could blow apart enemy fortifications. His M1911A1 pistol rode secure in its leather holster. Salt water had already soaked through the leather. The metal remained mechanically sound despite the dunking. Water dripped from every piece of gear. Japanese defenders had transformed this small island into a fortress of death. 4,500 enemy soldiers waited under Rear Admiral Keiji Shibasaki. Less than 3 square miles of coral had become a maze of bunkers and gun positions. Their officers carried Type 14 Nambu pistols. These weapons chambered the standard 8 by 22 mm round. The Empire's chosen sidearm would soon face its ultimate test. Marines pushed through the lagoon as machine guns erupted from hidden positions. Concrete pillboxes revealed their locations with muzzle flashes. The unexpected low tide had ruined their assault plan. What should have been a quick beach landing became a nightmare wade through open water. Murderous fire poured down from every direction. Bodies began floating in the blood-tinged waves. The next 76 hours would prove something beyond doubt. American small arms design had achieved clear superiority. The M1911A1 firing its devastating .45 ACP cartridge would dominate every close-quarters engagement. Japanese weapons would fail when Marines needed stopping power most. Mathematical precision would demonstrate this advantage again and again. Close-quarters combat reduced distances to mere feet. Sometimes inches separated fighters locked in deadly struggles. The difference between a 230-grain bullet delivering 370 foot-pounds of energy became crystal clear. Japanese 100-grain projectiles managed barely 220 foot-pounds. This gap meant the difference between immediate incapacitation and continued enemy resistance. Between life and death for American fighting men. Battles across the Pacific in 1943 revealed fundamental truths about weapon design. The chasm between American and Japanese military sidearms reflected more than technical specifications. Different design philosophies shaped each weapon's development. Industrial capabilities determined what was possible to manufacture. Tactical doctrines influenced what features were considered important. Understanding of combat effectiveness separated winners from losers. The M1911A1 represented decades of American combat experience. Industrial innovation had refined every component. The Type 14 Nambu showed Japan's struggle to match Western military technology. Their industrial base lacked the capacity for effective weapons development. Combat feedback never reached designers in meaningful ways. This disparity would appear in every close-quarters engagement from Guadalcanal to Okinawa. The thunder of American .45 caliber rounds consistently overwhelmed the inadequate crack of Japanese 8mm bullets. These weapons tell a story beyond ballistics and manufacturing processes. Industrial supremacy and engineering excellence determine victory in modern warfare. The M1911A1's origins trace back to Philippine jungles 4 decades before Tarawa. Events in those distant campaigns would reshape military thinking forever. The Philippine-American War from 1899 to 1902 presented American forces with a tactical nightmare. This conflict would change sidearm development in ways nobody anticipated. Moro juramentado warriors bound their limbs with leather cords. This prevented blood loss during their suicidal charges. Native drugs dulled their sensitivity to pain. They launched themselves at American positions with frightening determination. The Standard Army sidearm proved catastrophically inadequate. The Colt Model 1892 double-action revolver chambered the 38 long Colt cartridge. This weapon simply could not stop charging warriors. American soldiers would empty their cylinders into attacking Moros. Multiple hits to center mass failed to halt the assault. Horror filled their faces as wounded enemies continued forward. Blade weapons cut down Americans despite multiple bullet wounds. Colonel Louis Lagarde documented these encounters in medical reports that would influence military thinking for generations. His 1904 report described typical combat situations. American soldiers placed multiple .38 caliber rounds into charging attackers. 3 bullets might perforate both lungs. One could pass completely through the body. Yet these mortally wounded warriors continued fighting until finally stopped by rifle butts to the skull. Antonio Caspe became a case study in ballistic inadequacy. 4 .38 long Colt bullets struck him at close range. 3 perforated his lungs completely. 1 passed through his entire torso. He continued his attack until a rifle butt crushed his forehead. Only then did he collapse. The .38 long Colt's 150-grain bullet at 770 feet per second lacked the energy transfer necessary for immediate incapacitation. This failure prompted the most comprehensive ballistic study in military history. The Thompson-Lagarde tests of 1904 would establish scientific principles for military sidearms. Colonel John T. Thompson would later develop the famous Thompson submachine gun. Major Louis Anatole Lagarde of the Medical Corps brought scientific methodology to weapons testing. Their mission was determining minimum effective caliber for military pistols. The Nelson Morris Company Union Stockyards in Chicago became their testing ground. Methods that would seem barbaric by modern standards provided crucial scientific data. Live cattle and human cadavers were shot with various calibers. 7.65 by 21 mm parabellum, 30 caliber Luger, 9 by 19 mm parabellum, 38 long Colt, 38 ACP, 45 Colt, 476 Elay, 455 Webley. Testing methodology was precise and methodical. Time to incapacitation was recorded for live animals. Body sway measurements were taken from suspended cadavers. Wound channels were examined through dissection. The newly developed X-ray technology revealed internal damage patterns. Every variable was documented and analyzed. Results proved unequivocal and shocking. Animals shot with 30 caliber Luger showed minimal distress even after 10 rounds. Those hit with 9 mm or 38 caliber rounds showed greater effects, but often required 8 or more shots to achieve incapacitation. Animals struck with 45 caliber rounds typically collapsed by the 4th shot. Immediate and severe physiological trauma was clearly evident. Cadaver tests revealed even more dramatic differences between calibers. Bullets striking bone shafts created measurable oscillation patterns. Researchers assigned numerical values to body movement after impact. The 45 caliber rounds consistently produced 2 to 3 times more movement than smaller calibers. Scientific measurement confirmed what battlefield experience had suggested. The board's conclusion was absolute and uncompromising. Any bullet intended for military use must have stopping effect at short ranges. This required a caliber not less than 45 inches. Below this threshold, No amount of velocity increase within handgun parameters could compensate. Insufficient bullet mass could not be overcome by speed alone. John Moses Browning had already established himself as America's premier firearms innovator. His rifles and shotguns equipped hunters and soldiers worldwide. Browning had been developing a .41 caliber semi-automatic pistol with Colt when the Army's requirements became clear. He rapidly scaled his design to accommodate the larger .45 caliber cartridge. This adaptation created what would become the Model 1905. The cartridge underwent several development iterations. Colt worked with Winchester repeating arms on ammunition specifications. Frankfurt Arsenal provided military testing expertise. Union Metallic Cartridge Company handled mass production development. The original loading featured a 200-grain bullet at 900 feet per second. This evolved into the standardized military load. A 230-grain full metal jacket bullet at 830 feet per second from a 5-inch barrel became the specification. Browning's design genius lay in elegant simplicity and robust construction. The M1911 utilized short recoil operation. A swinging link lowered the barrel out of engagement with the slide during cycling. This system was inherently reliable and easy to manufacture. The single-action trigger provided consistent crisp pull characteristics. Combat accuracy depended on trigger consistency. Two safety mechanisms prevented accidental discharge while allowing rapid deployment. The grip safety required firm hand pressure to deactivate. The manual thumb safety provided additional protection. These features could be operated without shifting grip or losing sight picture. The 7-round detachable magazine enabled quick reloading under combat conditions. A critical design feature allowed firing the chambered round even without a magazine inserted. This proved crucial when magazines were damaged or lost in combat. Many weapons would not function at all without magazines properly seated. Browning understood that combat conditions often damaged equipment. Extensive testing from 1906 to 1911 pitted the Browning design against competitors. Savage offered their own design. Luger submitted a modified version of their famous pistol. Others competed for the lucrative military contract. The torture tests were extraordinary by any standard. 6,000 rounds were fired as rapidly as possible. This was accomplished in 27 minutes of continuous firing. The heated pistol was dunked in water between firing strings. Mud and sand were deliberately introduced to test reliability. The Browning Colt design functioned flawlessly throughout every test. On March 29, 1911, the U.S. Army formally adopted their new sidearm. The automatic pistol caliber .45 model of 1911 became the official designation. This weapon would serve American forces for 74 years. World War I combat experience led to refinements incorporated in the improved model. The M1911A1 was standardized in 1924 with soldier feedback from trench warfare incorporated. A shorter trigger accommodated smaller hands, common among immigrant soldiers. Scalloped cuts in the frame behind the trigger improved finger reach. An arched mainspring housing provided better natural pointing characteristics. A longer grip safety spur prevented hammer bite injuries. Wider front and rear sights enabled faster target acquisition. A shortened hammer spur reduced snagging on equipment. These changes might seem minor to casual observers. Each reflected systematic American approach to incorporating combat lessons into equipment development. User feedback was collected, analyzed, and implemented. This process continued throughout the weapon's service life. The .45 ACP cartridge itself represented optimized ballistic performance within practical constraints. Operating at relatively low 21,000 psi chamber pressure compared to 35,000 psi for 9mm parabellum prioritized reliability and barrel longevity. high-pressure cartridges, stressed mechanisms, and shortened service life. The 230 grain projectile measured 451 inches in diameter. This created a wound channel significantly larger than its caliber due to tissue displacement. Temporary cavitation effects multiplied the bullet's effectiveness. At 830 feet per second, the bullet traveled just below the speed of sound. This avoided instability that occurs during transonic flight, when bullets decelerate through the sound barrier. The heavy bullet retained energy exceptionally well, maintained lethal force even at extended handgun ranges of 50 yards. Lighter, faster bullets shed velocity rapidly and lost effectiveness. The 45 ACP's ballistic coefficient provided consistent performance across combat ranges. When America entered World War II, M1911A1 production transformed from peacetime trickle to wartime flood. This transformation demonstrated American industrial might at its absolute apex. Colt Manufacturing Company held the original patents and production expertise. They immediately expanded production at their Hartford, Connecticut facility. Even Colt's maximum capacity could not meet wartime demand. Approximately 800 pistols per day by 1943 was insufficient. The Ordnance Department under Brigadier General Gladian Barnes orchestrated one of the most successful distributed manufacturing programs of the war. Unlike complex weapons requiring artisanal craftsmanship, the M1911A1's robust design allowed mass production techniques. Contracts went to companies with no previous firearms experience, but strong manufacturing capabilities. Remington Rand, the typewriter manufacturer, received their first contract in March 1942. Their Syracuse, New York plant retooled from producing typing machines and adding devices. They ultimately manufactured 8 7.751 M1911A1 pistols. This exceeded production by any other contractor, including original manufacturer Colt. Their production methodology revolutionized pistol manufacturing. Extensive use of stamping replaced traditional forging operations. Automated checkering of grip frames eliminated handwork. Statistical quality control maintained tolerances while dramatically speeding production. These innovations were shared with other contractors. Ithaca Gun Company of New York traditionally manufactured shotguns. They produced 36-9-129 pistols during the war years. Their innovative use of investment casting for small parts reduced machining time by 60%. Manufacturing efficiency improvements benefited the entire program. Union Switch and Signal Company of Swissvale, Pennsylvania, manufactured railroad equipment in peacetime. They produced 55,000 pistols of exceptional quality. Improved heat treatment processes extended barrel life by 30%. Their innovations were incorporated into manufacturing specifications. The Singer Manufacturing Company's contribution was numerically small at just 500 pistols. These sewing machine manufacturers produced educational guns of such exceptional quality they remain the most sought-after M1911A1 variants among collectors today. Singer developed tooling and processes later transferred to other manufacturers. Their impact multiplied far beyond direct production numbers. Part standardization was absolute throughout the program. Any component from any manufacturer would function in any frame. This interchangeability was deliberately engineered into specifications. Tolerances were set at 3 to 5 thousandths of an inch in most critical dimensions. This ensured function despite manufacturing variations, field contamination, or thermal expansion. Interchangeability proved crucial during depot-level maintenance. Armorers often assembled functional pistols from components of multiple damaged weapons. Salvaged parts from different manufacturers worked together seamlessly. This design philosophy reflected American industrial thinking. The ammunition supply chain matched weapon production capacity. Frankfurt Arsenal served as the Army's primary ammunition facility. They produced over 1 billion rounds of 45 ACP during the war years. Western Cartridge Company, Remington Arms, and Winchester. Repeating arms added another 2 billion rounds to the supply. Quality control was stringent throughout ammunition production. Every manufacturing lot underwent accuracy testing. Pressure testing verified safety margins. Function testing used multiple different weapons. Specifications remained consistent throughout the entire production run. Each cartridge contained a 230-grain bullet. 5 grains of powder, either bullseye or similar burning rate, produced the required velocity. 830 feet per second, plus or minus 25 feet per second, was the specification. This consistency ensured reliable function across all manufacturers' weapons. Special ammunition variants demonstrated American innovation and attention to detail. The M12 shot cartridge was developed for aircrew survival kits. It contained 118 pieces of number 7 and 1/2 bird shot in a paper capsule. This loading was effective against small game to 10 feet range. Downed airmen could hunt for food in survival situations. The improved M15 shot cartridge used a blue wax capsule for better moisture resistance. Pacific Theater humidity destroyed paper capsules rapidly. Wax provided protection in tropical conditions. Tracer rounds for training allowed shooters to observe their bullet paths. This improved marksmanship training efficiency. Proof loads marked with distinctive stained cases tested weapons during manufacturing. These loads generated higher than normal pressure to verify safety margins. Only weapons that passed proof testing were accepted for military service. The Marine Corps Table of Organization Evolution reflected combat lessons about pistol importance. In 1942, a Marine division was authorized 798 pistols total. These went primarily to officers' NCOs, and crew served weapon teams. Combat experience quickly changed this allocation. By December 1943, after the Tarawa battle, authorization increased to 1,377 pistols per division. Close quarters combat had demonstrated the weapon's value. By 1945, authorization reached 1,777 pistols per division. The 1st Marine Division on Okinawa actually carried over 2,000 M1911A1 pistols. Many riflemen acquired pistols through unofficial channels. Distribution prioritized frontline combat units over support personnel. The 2nd Marine Division at Tarawa carried 1,456 M1911A1 pistols for approximately 18,000 Marines. This represented 1 pistol per 12 men. By Iwo Jima, the 5th Marine Division carried 1,789 pistols for similar unit strength. The ratio had improved to 1 pistol per 10 men. Army units showed similar equipment evolution patterns. The 77th Infantry Division on Okinawa carried 1,234 M1911A1 pistols among 16,000 soldiers. Combat commanders recognized the weapon's value in Pacific fighting conditions. The Type 14 Nambu represented Imperial Japan's attempt to create a modern military sidearm. Its development history reveals fundamental limitations that would doom the weapon in combat. Colonel Kijiro Nambu earned recognition as Japan's premier firearms designer. He was often called the John Browning of Japan by Western observers. Nambu designed his first semi-automatic pistol in 1902. This Type A Grand Papa Nambu superficially resembled the German Luger pistol. It featured an exposed barrel and distinctive knurled cocking knob. However, the operating mechanism was entirely different from European designs. The Type 14 was adopted in Taisho 14, corresponding to 1925 in the Western calendar. It evolved from earlier Nambu designs, but incorporated supposed improvements. Japanese military experience in China influenced these modifications. The designers believed they had created a superior weapon. The pistol utilized a locked breech mechanism with a floating locking block. This concept was theoretically sound, but required precise manufacturing tolerances. Japanese industrial capabilities would prove inadequate for consistent production. The mechanism was inherently more complex than necessary. The 8 by 22 mm Nambu cartridge was unique to Japanese weapons. No other military force adopted this caliber. It fired a 102-grain bullet at approximately 1065 feet per second from the Type 14's 4.6-inch barrel. Muzzle velocity seemed impressive on paper. Certain specifications appeared superior to the American M1911A1 at first glance. The Type 14 held 8 rounds compared to 7 for the American pistol. Muzzle velocity exceeded the .45 ACP by 200 feet per second. The pistol weighed 2.03 pounds, unloaded nearly half a pound less than the M1911A1. Initial production models from Nagoya Arsenal and Kokura Arsenal showed excellent craftsmanship. Deep blue finish covered all metal surfaces. Parts were carefully hand-fitted during assembly. These early weapons demonstrated Japanese capability for precision manufacturing. However, these surface advantages masked fundamental design flaws. The 8 by 22 mm Nambu cartridge, despite higher velocity, generated only 256 foot-pounds of muzzle energy. The American .45 ACP produced 369 foot-pounds, representing a 31% advantage. Kinetic energy determines stopping power more than velocity alone. The lightweight 102-grain bullet shed velocity rapidly in flight. It retained only 180 foot-pounds at 50 yards. The heavier American bullet maintained 300 foot-pounds at the same distance. Energy retention was critical for combat effectiveness at extended ranges. The bottlenecked case design theoretically aided cartridge feeding into the chamber. However, this created extraction problems when chambers became fouled. Straight-walled cases like the .45 ACP extracted more reliably under adverse conditions. Pacific combat would prove these conditions were the norm, not the exception. Japanese military procurement doctrine created additional complications for weapon effectiveness. Unlike American forces who were issued weapons, Japanese officers purchased their sidearms from their own salary. A Type 14 cost 78 yen in 1940. This represented approximately half a lieutenant's monthly pay. This economic barrier meant many officers received minimal training with their weapons. They viewed pistols as status symbols rather than combat tools. Some officers, particularly those from wealthy families, purchased foreign pistols instead. Spanish ruby pistols in .32 ACP were popular alternatives. Inherited European revolvers were also common among senior officers. The Type 14's design philosophy reflected Japanese tactical doctrine that prioritized spiritual power over firepower. The Imperial Japanese Army Infantry Manual devoted more pages to sword technique than pistol marksmanship. Bushido philosophy emphasized close combat with blade weapons. Firearms were considered secondary weapons for specific situations. Pistols were intended for executing prisoners, controlling subordinates, and ritual suicide rather than primary combat tools. This doctrinal blindness prevented recognition of design flaws. Defects that would prove fatal in combat were never identified during peacetime training. Manufacturing quality deteriorated catastrophically as the war progressed. Pre-war Type 14 pistols featured 17 distinct inspection stamps. Careful polishing enhanced appearance and function. Parts were hand-fitted to individual weapons. Quality control was meticulous. By 1943, inspection marks had reduced to just 3 stamps. Surface finishing was eliminated to speed production. Parts interchangeability degraded severely between different production runs. Late war production from subcontractors showed obvious tool marks. Rough casting and dimensional variations would have failed pre-war inspection standards. The Type 14's most critical design failures centered on its controls and magazine system. The safety lever was positioned on the left side above the trigger guard. Operating this safety required the shooting hand to shift grip completely. Alternatively, the support hand could operate the safety. This was impossible when wounded carrying equipment or grappling with an enemy. Combat situations demanded immediate weapon deployment. The M1911A1's ambidextrous safety could be operated with the thumb of the firing hand. Grip and sight picture were maintained throughout safety disengagement. The weapon could be made ready while drawing from the holster. The magazine release presented another tactical liability. A spring-loaded lever at the bottom front of the grip controlled magazine retention. This lever often released inadvertently during normal handling. The magazine would drop, leaving the pistol unable to fire. The magazine disconnect safety prevented firing without a properly seated magazine. The 1939 modification added a magazine retention spring. This was intended to prevent loss of magazines during combat. However, this improvement made combat reloading nearly impossible. Magazines had to be yanked out against spring pressure. This often required both hands and considerable force. In tropical conditions, corrosion welded magazines in place. Marines reported capturing Type 14 pistols with magazines frozen solid. Desperate Japanese had hammered unsuccessfully, attempting to reload their weapons. The magazines remained stuck despite violent efforts to remove them. Production statistics reveal Japan's industrial limitations clearly. From 1926 to 1945, approximately 4,000 Type 14 pistols were manufactured. This included production from all arsenals and subcontractors. Monthly production peaked at 3,500 units in 1944. Quality was abysmal by this point in the war. The Nambu Rifle Manufacturing Company produced civilian market versions. Chuo Kogyo Company handled some military contracts. Tokyo Gas and Electric subsidiaries manufactured pistols under license. Quality control was so poor that parts from different manufacturers would not interchange. Even parts from different production runs at the same factory often failed to fit properly. The Type 14 Nambu's failures in combat were not isolated incidents. They represented systematic design flaws that reflected fundamental misunderstanding of combat requirements. Each deficiency might have been tolerable in isolation. Combined, they created a weapon that failed catastrophically under Pacific combat conditions. The safety mechanism represented the most immediate tactical liability in close combat. Located above the trigger guard on the left side, the safety lever required complex manipulation. Either the firing grip had to be shifted, losing sight picture and trigger finger position, or the support hand had to reach across the weapon. In close combat, where milliseconds determined survival, this two-handed operation proved fatal. Marines reported numerous instances of Japanese officers struggling with their safeties while being overrun. Frantic attempts to disengage the mechanism failed under stress. The officers died with loaded weapons that could not fire. The M1911A1's thumb safety operated smoothly with the firing hand thumb. Sight picture and grip remained undisturbed. The magazine disconnect safety intended to prevent accidental discharge became a critical vulnerability. When magazines were damaged, lost, or frozen in place by corrosion, the entire weapon became inoperable. Unlike the M1911A1, which would fire its chambered round without a magazine, the Type 14 required a functioning, properly seated magazine to operate. In the coral sand of Tarawa or volcanic ash of Iwo Jima, magazines were easily damaged. Bent feed lips prevented proper seating. Dented magazine bodies bound in the grip frame. This single point of failure rendered countless Type 14 pistols completely useless when they were needed most. The Type 14 lacked a slide-hold open device for ammunition management. When the last round fired, only the magazine follower held the bolt open. Removing the magazine allowed the bolt to slam forward. This gave no indication the weapon was empty. In combat, shooters discovered empty chambers only when triggers clicked uselessly. The M1911A1's slide lock was activated by the magazine follower after firing the last round. This held the slide open, providing immediate visual and tactile indication of an empty weapon. Reloading was faster with the slide locked back. A fresh magazine could be inserted and the slide release activated with the thumb. Extraction failures plagued the Type 14 particularly with deteriorating ammunition quality. The bottlenecked 8x22mm case theoretically provided superior feeding characteristics. However, it created a smaller bearing surface for the extractor to grip. Combined with wartime ammunition, using corrosive primers and inconsistent brass cases stuck in chambers regularly. When extraction-failed cases were torn through by the extractor, the weapon became a single shot requiring manual case removal. The straight-walled 45 ACP case provided a larger bearing surface and lower operating pressure. Extraction remained reliable even from badly fouled chambers. The recoil spring assembly utilized a complex dual-spring system. This required precise manufacturing and careful maintenance. When springs lost tension from tropical heat, and humidity cycling became erratic, failure to return to battery was common. Manual slide manipulation was required to chamber rounds. The M1911A1's single recoil spring, even when weakened, usually maintained sufficient function. Combat effectiveness was preserved even with degraded springs. Simplicity proved superior to theoretical elegance. Tropical conditions revealed additional vulnerabilities throughout the Type 14's design. Tight manufacturing tolerances acceptable in Japan's temperate climate became serious liabilities in Pacific conditions. High humidity caused dimensional changes in wooden grips. Metal components corroded rapidly despite protective finishes. Heat did terrible things to weapons on Pilelio. The temperature climbed to 115 degrees Fahrenheit. Metal parts expanded beyond normal limits. Actions seized up completely. Moving parts bound together. What worked perfectly in cooler conditions failed catastrophically under that blazing Pacific sun. The monsoon season brought different problems. Guadalcanal turned into a rust factory. Humidity hung at 100% day and night. Metal corroded within hours of cleaning. Mechanisms froze solid from oxidation. Springs snapped under the weight of accumulated rust. What moisture didn't destroy immediately, it weakened for later failure. Yet the M1911A1 kept firing. Its tolerances were deliberately loose. Target shooters complained constantly about this sloppiness. They wanted precision. They demanded tight fits. They criticized the wide gaps between parts. But this apparent weakness became battlefield strength. When heat expanded every piece of metal, the loose tolerances absorbed the change. When humidity tried to bind the action with rust, gaps allowed movement. When coral dust infiltrated every crevice, oversized clearances let the weapon function. The pistol worked because it wasn't built to perfectionist standards. Japanese designers had pursued different goals entirely. The Type 14 demanded precision. Every part fitted exactly. Tolerances were measured in thousandths of inches. The weapon looked beautiful. It felt solid. It impressed inspectors. But battlefield conditions destroyed this precision within days. Maintenance became a nightmare with Japanese weapons. Field conditions made proper care nearly impossible. The Type 14 required specialized tools for basic disassembly. Combat units rarely carried these tools. Even when tools were available, complete breakdown involved 34 separate steps. Small springs flew in every direction. Tiny pins disappeared into coral sand. Reassembly became a puzzle with missing pieces. Marines could strip their M1911A1 blindfolded. The process required no tools whatsoever. Press the recoil spring plug down. Rotate the barrel bushing clockwise. Remove the recoil spring and guide rod. Push the slide stop pin out. Lift off the slide and barrel. The entire process took 15 seconds. Cleaning could happen anywhere with anything available. Marines used seawater when fresh water was scarce. They used motor oil when gun oil ran out. They used coconut oil from local palms. In desperate moments, they used urine when nothing else existed. The weapon tolerated everything and kept functioning. Reassembly reversed the disassembly steps exactly. No measuring required. No special alignment needed. Parts only fit together one way. A Marine could reassemble the pistol in total darkness by feel alone. Many did exactly that during night watches or blackout conditions. Ammunition problems made everything worse for Japanese forces. By 1944, their industrial capacity was crumbling. Quality control had virtually disappeared. Powder charges varied wildly within single production lots. Primer compounds became unreliable. Cartridges failed to fire or fired with dangerous pressure variations. American ordnance units tested captured Japanese ammunition thoroughly. The results were shocking. Velocity variations exceeded 200 feet per second within the same batch of cartridges. Some rounds barely cleared the barrel. Others generated pressures that cracked frames. No soldier could rely on consistent performance from such ammunition. Squib loads created deadly traps. The bullet would lodge partway down the barrel. The next shot would encounter this obstruction. The resulting explosion would destroy the weapon and often kill or maim the shooter. Japanese soldiers learned to fear their own ammunition as much as enemy fire. Excessive powder charges caused different problems. Double charges created chamber pressures far beyond design limits. Frames cracked along stress lines. Chambers bulged out of round. Barrels split lengthwise. The weapon became a hand grenade rather than a pistol. American ammunition maintained remarkable consistency throughout the entire war. Quality control remained strict despite massive production increases. Velocity variations rarely exceeded 25 feet per second within production lots. Soldiers could depend absolutely on their ammunition performing exactly as expected. The real testing ground was close-quarters combat. Pacific Island fighting brought enemies face-to-face regularly. Distances were measured in feet rather than yards. Split seconds determined who lived and who died. Weapon reliability became a matter of personal survival. Guadalcanal provided the first major test. Henderson Field became the focal point of desperate fighting. October 24 to 25, 1942, brought wave after wave of Japanese attacks. Sergeant John Barcelona held his position for 3 straight days without sleep, food, or relief. His machine gun work became legendary, but witnesses saw something else equally important. Barcelona used his M1911A1 extensively when Japanese soldiers broke through the perimeter. Private First Class Nash Phillips was wounded in the same battle. His testimony revealed the pistol's crucial role. Barcelona had that machine gun running for 72 straight hours. But when the Japs got inside his position, that .45 saved his life over and over. Hand-to-hand fighting erupted when Japanese soldiers reached the Marine positions. Barcelona's M1911A1 delivered immediate stopping power. Each 230-grain bullet hit with devastating effect. Marines often modified their ball ammunition by cutting crosses in the bullet tips. These improvised hollow points expanded on impact. Phillips described seeing Japanese soldiers knocked completely off their feet by pistol fire. The massive .45 caliber bullets transferred enormous energy. Recipients flew backward, as if struck by sledgehammers. Single shots ended fights that might have required multiple rifle rounds. The Japanese assault involved approximately 3,000 soldiers from the veteran Sendai Division. Marine defenders numbered fewer than 700 along Barcelona's sector. Local numerical superiority approached 5-1 in favor of the attackers. Every American weapon had to achieve maximum effectiveness, or the position would fall. Under such circumstances, the difference between immediate incapacitation and delayed effect multiplied across hundreds of individual encounters. The .45 ACP's instant stopping power versus the 8mm Nambu's lesser impact could determine the battle's outcome. Each engagement favored American weapons significantly. Tarawa brought different challenges, but similar results. Staff Sergeant William Bordelon landed with the assault waves on November 20, 1943. His amphibious tractor absorbed numerous hits. All but 4 Marines aboard were killed before reaching the beach. Bordelon's mission focused on destroying Japanese pillboxes with demolition charges. Approaching these fortified positions required suppressive fire from every available weapon. After placing charges on 2 pillboxes, machine gun fire wounded Bordelon severely. His demolition charges were exhausted, but the fighting continued. Marine Combat Correspondent Staff Sergeant David Dempsey witnessed what happened next. Bordelon grabbed a rifle and kept fighting. He covered other Marines as they advanced toward remaining positions. The close-quarters nature of Tarawa's fighting meant pistols saw constant use. Every Marine engineer carried an M1911A1 as their final defense while placing charges against enemy positions. The Type 14's combat failures became equally well documented throughout the Pacific Campaign. Marine Private Robert Sherrod worked as a Time Life correspondent embedded with the 2nd Marine Division. His first-hand accounts revealed the Japanese pistols' inadequacies under battlefield conditions. At Tarawa, Sherrod witnessed a Japanese officer's desperate struggle with his malfunctioning Nambu. The officer was screaming at his men while trying to fire his pistol. He pulled the trigger repeatedly, but nothing happened. The weapon had jammed completely. Sand or a defective magazine had rendered it useless. A Marine shot the Japanese officer with a .45 from approximately 20 feet distance. The enemy soldier flew backward like he had been struck with a sledgehammer. The devastating impact demonstrated the American cartridge's superior stopping power. Similar scenarios played out across every Pacific battlefield. Saipan witnessed the war's largest banzai charge on June 15, 1944. Marine Corporal John de Alessandro of the 27th Marines described close combat in pre-dawn darkness. Thousands of Japanese soldiers attacked in human waves. Officers led from the front, waving swords and pistols above their heads. De Alessandro saw one Japanese officer attempting to clear his jammed Nambu while running toward American positions. The officer worked the action frantically, trying to restore function. De Alessandro shot him with his .45 from close range. One shot stopped the attack permanently. The officer went down hard and stayed down. The .45 would stop them cold every time. The impact resembled hitting them with a baseball bat. The mathematical reality of stopping power became apparent through medical documentation. Marine Corps medical personnel documented wound characteristics extensively, providing scientific data on terminal ballistics. Hits from .45 ACP rounds to the torso created temporary wound cavities exceeding 4 inches in diameter. These massive cavities caused immediate blood pressure drops and nervous system disruption. Victims lost consciousness within seconds. The The wounds were immediately incapacitating regardless of exact placement. The 8mm Nambu, with its lighter, faster bullet, created wounds barely larger than its actual caliber. The temporary wound cavity was minimal. Multiple hits were often required for incapacitation. Victims could continue fighting for extended periods despite being mortally wounded. Lieutenant Colonel Louis Chesty Puller commanded the 1st Battalion, 7th Marines at Guadalcanal. His after-action report documented the .45 automatic pistol's performance extensively. The weapon proved invaluable during Japanese infiltration attempts and banzai attacks. Multiple instances showed single rounds immediately stopping attacking soldiers. Enemy officers armed with their issued pistols failed to inflict casualties even at extremely close range. The disparity between weapons was obvious to every Marine who witnessed both in action. American pistols ended fights. Japanese pistols failed to start them. This disparity reflected fundamentally different military philosophies shaped by distinct cultural and historical experiences. American doctrine had been forged in frontier wars and colonial conflicts. These experiences prioritized overwhelming firepower and individual marksmanship skills above all other considerations. Japanese doctrine remained rooted in samurai traditions and Yamato Damashi, the Japanese fighting spirit. This philosophy emphasized spiritual power over material advantages. Victory came through superior will and dedication rather than superior equipment. Weapons were secondary to warrior spirit. The Thompson-Lagarde tests had provided American forces with scientific justification for maximum stopping power requirements. The conclusion that nothing less than .45 caliber would suffice became absolute military dogma. This wasn't mere preference or tradition. It was evidence-based requirement backed by extensive testing. The tests measured immediate incapacitation rather than eventual lethality. The ability to stop an attacker before they could close distance or continue fighting was paramount. The temporal element proved crucial in close combat situations. The difference between immediate and eventual incapacitation was measured in American lives saved. American training reflected this emphasis on practical battlefield effectiveness. At Paris Island and Camp Pendleton, Marines fired thousands of rounds in pistol training courses. The curriculum began with bullseye marksmanship, teaching proper trigger control, sight picture, and breathing techniques. Then it progressed rapidly to combat shooting applications. Marines learned to fire from retention positions with the pistol held against their ribs. Point shooting without using sights became second nature. Engaging multiple targets while moving became routine. The standard qualification required 70% hits on man-sized targets at 25 yards, firing 50 rounds under strict time pressure. The M1911A1's manual of arms emphasized combat efficiency above all else. The draw technique, later called the Israeli draw, was standard Marine procedure, drawing while simultaneously thumbing off the safety. Finger entering the trigger guard only when the muzzle cleared the holster and oriented toward the target. Marines practiced malfunction clearances until they became completely automatic responses. Tap, rack, bang. Tap the magazine to ensure proper seating. Rack the slide to clear any obstruction. Bang. Fire the weapon immediately. The sequence took less than 2 seconds with proper training. They learned to count shots mentally, reloading before the slide locked back whenever possible. This maintained continuous fire capability during extended engagements. Fresh magazines were inserted with the slide forward, chambering a round immediately. No time was wasted on empty weapons. Japanese pistol training remained minimal and largely ceremonial in nature. The Imperial Japanese Army's official training manual devoted only 2 pages to pistol marksmanship. By comparison, 12 pages covered traditional sword techniques in detail. Officers received perhaps 50 rounds of annual training ammunition when supplies were available. The emphasis remained on precision shooting at stationary targets from formal, parade ground stances. Combat effectiveness was never considered seriously. Many officers arrived in combat zones having fired fewer rounds through their Type 14s than American Marines fired during a single training session. Japanese tactical doctrine viewed pistols primarily as symbols of military authority rather than practical combat tools. The weapon's primary purposes included maintaining unit discipline, executing deserters or cowards, performing honorable suicide when capture seemed imminent, and executing prisoners according to military custom. The idea of using pistols as primary combat weapons during assault operations seemed completely absurd when the warrior's ancestral sword represented his very soul. This philosophical blindness prevented recognition of the pistol's tactical importance in modern close-quarters combat situations. American doctrine evolved continuously based on direct combat feedback from operational units. After Guadalcanal, training incorporated shooting from prone and supine positions, common when wounded, or taking cover from enemy fire. After Tarawa, where Marines fought in waist-deep water, training included waterborne operations. Keeping weapons dry during amphibious landings became crucial. Clearing water from barrels immediately after immersion was emphasized. Immediate action procedures after complete submersion were practiced repeatedly. After reports of Japanese infiltrators appearing in marine foxholes, training incorporated weapon retention techniques and contact distance shooting skills. The ammunition philosophy differed radically between the two military systems. Americans designed the .45 ACP for one specific purpose: maximum stopping power within practical operational constraints. Velocity was deliberately kept subsonic to avoid transonic instability that reduced accuracy. Bullet weight was maximized to increase momentum transfer to targets. The round's rainbow trajectory at extended distances was completely irrelevant for intended use. Pistol engagements occurred within 25 yards, maximum. Trajectory considerations beyond that distance served no practical purpose whatsoever. Power at close range was everything. Japanese 8mm Nambu development prioritized velocity and flat trajectory, seeking rifle-like performance from a pistol cartridge. This pursuit of inappropriate characteristics sacrificed stopping power for negligible practical advantages. The high-velocity, lightweight bullet delivered less energy to targets despite higher muzzle velocity. Cultural factors influenced actual weapons employment in combat significantly. American individualism encouraged personal initiative and field adaptation. Marines routinely modified their M1911A1s with filed sights for faster draw. Stippled front straps provided better grip security. Shortened triggers accommodated smaller hands. Such modifications would have been completely unthinkable in the rigid Japanese military system. Conformity was absolute at every level. Initiative was actively discouraged below senior command ranks. Individual modifications to issued equipment would result in severe disciplinary action. The Japanese concept of bamboo spear spirit pervaded all military thinking. This belief held that superior spiritual power could overcome any material disadvantage. When Chinese forces complained about the Type 14's inadequacy against Russian-supplied weapons, Japanese military advisors responded that insufficient warrior spirit, not inferior weapons, caused the failures. This systematic denial of material reality prevented any meaningful improvement of weapon systems. Problems were always attributed to individual failings rather than design deficiencies. The weapons were perfect. Only the warriors using them were imperfect. American pragmatism demanded measurable effectiveness from all equipment. The Bureau of Ordnance conducted continuous testing of ammunition performance throughout the war. Data accumulated on velocity, chamber pressure, accuracy, and terminal ballistics. Every aspect of performance was measured and documented. Feedback from combat units drove systematic modifications and improvements. Improved magazine springs were developed after reports of feeding problems in field conditions. Harder extractors were designed after reports of extraction failures with dirty ammunition. Enhanced rust preventive finishes were created specifically for tropical service environments. Each modification underwent rigorous testing before implementation in operational units. Improvements actually had to improve measurable performance. Changes for change's sake were rejected immediately. Only modifications that enhanced battlefield effectiveness were adopted. The Pacific Theater provided the ultimate proving ground for weapons reliability under environmental extremes. Both American and Japanese pistols faced conditions impossible to replicate during peacetime testing. From freezing Aleutian winds to equatorial Solomon Islands heat. From coral atolls barely above sea level to volcanic mountains shrouded in sulfurous clouds. Guadalcanal's climate represented tropical hell on Earth for weapons and men alike. Annual rainfall exceeded 200 inches, falling in torrential downpours. Humidity remained at 100% continuously. Temperatures ranged from 75 degrees at night to 95 degrees daily, but felt like 115 degrees, according to marine accounts. Metal rusted literally overnight in this environment. Leather equipment rotted within weeks of issue. Wooden rifle stocks warped and split from constant moisture absorption. Nothing organic survived long in this climate. Everything required constant attention and maintenance. The M1911A1's Parkerized finish proved superior to traditional bluing in these conditions. The phosphate coating absorbed oil readily, providing better corrosion protection. Even when surface rust appeared, the pistol continued functioning normally. Function was never compromised by cosmetic deterioration. The Type 14's blued finish looked beautiful when new, but provided minimal corrosion protection. Surface rust appeared within days of exposure. This progressed rapidly to deep pitting within weeks. The weapon's appearance deteriorated dramatically, and function followed close behind. Marine Armorer Sergeant Thomas Morrison served with the 1st Marine Division on Guadalcanal. His personal journal documented daily maintenance challenges faced by combat units. The 45s need cleaning every single day, but they keep working even when they look like hell. We use motor oil, gun oil, even coconut oil. Anything to keep them lubricated and running. The captured Japanese pistols rust completely solid within 3 days maximum. Their springs break when you try to force the actions open. We have accumulated a pile of them that we cannot even disassemble for parts. They are completely useless as weapons. Tarawa presented entirely different environmental challenges for small arms. Coral sand, finer than talcum powder, infiltrated every mechanism regardless of protection attempts. The island's complete lack of vegetation meant no shade from equatorial sun that heated metal surfaces to literally burning temperatures. Marines wrapped pistol grips with cloth strips or adhesive tape to prevent burns from touching the weapons. Water remained critically scarce throughout the battle. 5 gallons per day allocated for an entire battalion made weapon cleaning impossible. Conservation was absolute necessity. The M1911A1's deliberately loose tolerances allowed continued function despite sand infiltration. Marines learned to work the slide vigorously before firing, allowing accumulated sand to fall through the gaps between parts. This crude cleaning method was surprisingly effective. The Type 14's precise tolerances meant individual sand particles could lock mechanisms completely solid. Working the action would not clear obstructions. Complete disassembly was required for cleaning, impossible under combat conditions. Most became permanently inoperable within hours. Peleliu, in September 1944, recorded the highest temperatures experienced during the Pacific War. Official readings reached 115 degrees Fahrenheit in shade. Temperatures in fighting positions among coral ridges exceeded 120 degrees. Marines suffered more heat casualties than combat wounds on many days. Metal expanded significantly under these extreme temperatures. Parts designed to fit precisely at normal temperatures would bind completely. The M1911A1, designed with thermal expansion tolerances, continued functioning normally. The Type 14's peacetime precision tolerances experienced binding as different parts expanded at different rates. Marine Private Eugene Sledge served with K Company, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines on Peleliu. His memoir described equipment challenges. Everything metal became too hot to touch with bare hands. We wrapped rifle slings around our hands to carry our weapons. Canteens burned our lips when we tried to drink. My .45 was so hot the cartridges in the magazine felt warm when I unloaded it for cleaning. But the weapon always worked. It always worked perfectly. Iwo Jima's volcanic ash presented unique mechanical challenges. The fine black sand was actually pulverized volcanic glass, highly abrasive to metal surfaces. It infiltrated sealed mechanisms, accelerating wear exponentially. The island's sulfur springs created corrosive vapor that etched exposed metal surfaces. After 5 weeks of continuous combat, many rifles and machine guns required complete replacement due to bore erosion. The abrasive environment literally wore out weapons faster than they could be supplied. Maintenance became a losing battle against geological forces. M1911A1 pistols, with their simple mechanisms and robust construction, maintained function despite accelerated wear rates. Type 14s suffered extraction failures as chambers eroded irregularly and fired cases stuck. The complex mechanism could not tolerate the accelerated wear. The Aleutian Campaign provided opposite environmental extremes from tropical operations. During the May 1943 Attu invasion, temperatures dropped below freezing with sustained winds exceeding 100 miles per hour. Standard lubricants congealed to tar-like consistency, binding mechanisms solid. Breath condensation froze instantly on metal surfaces, creating ice layers that locked actions completely. The M1911A1 functioned without lubrication entirely. Soldiers learned to clean all oil from weapons, running them completely dry in extreme cold. The Type 14's complex dual recoil spring system required lubrication to function properly. Without oil, the mechanism bound immediately. This made the weapon completely inoperable in extreme cold conditions. Japanese forces in the Aleutians were reduced to using captured American weapons. Saltwater immersion during amphibious operations challenged both weapons' designs severely. At Tarawa, Marines waded 500 yards through chest-deep water under continuous enemy fire. Weapons remained completely submerged for 10 to 15 minutes during the approach. The M1911A1, designed with drainage channels and minimal enclosed spaces, could be shaken vigorously and would function immediately after immersion. Water drained quickly from open areas. Function was restored within seconds of clearing the surf. The Type 14, with its enclosed trigger mechanism and complex internal spaces, retained salt water that required complete disassembly to drain properly. This was impossible under fire during assault landings. Most became permanently inoperable after saltwater exposure. Monsoon conditions on New Guinea and the Philippines tested waterproofing systems continuously. Rain fell without interruption for weeks at a time. Keeping weapons dry became impossible despite all efforts. Everything organic rotted quickly in the constant moisture. The M1911A1's plastic grips, introduced in 1943, were completely impervious to moisture damage. Steel parts required constant oiling but maintained proper function. The weapon tolerated complete saturation if properly maintained. The Type 14's wooden grips, especially on late war models, absorbed moisture continuously. Swelling wood eventually cracked frames along stress lines. The magazine retention spring, added in 1939, rusted in place completely, making magazine changes impossible. Maintenance supply philosophies reflected fundamental differences in logistics thinking. American forces received abundant cleaning materials as standard issue. Bore brushes, cleaning rods, cotton patches, CLP cleaner lubricant preservative, and specialized lubricants for extreme environmental conditions. Every Marine carried a complete pistol cleaning kit in his individual equipment. Maintenance was considered every individual's responsibility. Weapons were cleaned daily regardless of use. Prevention was emphasized over repair. Japanese forces by 1944 often completely lacked basic cleaning supplies. Captured documents indicated entire units sharing single cleaning rods between companies. Palm fronds served as cleaning patches. Motor oil substituted for gun oil when available. Field modifications demonstrated characteristic American adaptability under adverse conditions. Marines learned to polish feed ramps with emery cloth to improve cartridge feeding reliability. They relieved slide-to-frame fit with valve grinding compound to improve overall weapon reliability. Recoil springs from damaged weapons replaced worn springs to maintain proper tension. These modifications were performed at battalion-level maintenance, keeping weapons functional despite extreme wear conditions. Initiative was encouraged at every level. Japanese forces, lacking spare parts and modification capability, simply discarded malfunctioning Type 14s when repairs became impossible. No field-expedient repairs were attempted. Broken weapons were abandoned rather than adapted for continued service. The Battle of Okinawa, commencing April 1, 1945, represented the ultimate test of American and Japanese small arms effectiveness. This was the Pacific War's largest amphibious operation. Code-named Operation Iceberg, the invasion committed 183,000 American soldiers and Marines against 110,000 Japanese defenders. The island would serve as the primary staging area for the planned invasion of Japan itself. The 82-day battle would demonstrate with absolute finality the complete superiority of American weapon systems in the war's most savage and prolonged fighting. Okinawa's terrain differed radically from all previous Pacific battlefields. The island stretched 60 miles long and varied from 2 to 18 miles wide. Open farmland dominated the northern sections. Rugged limestone ridges, honeycombed with natural caves, characterized the heavily defended southern approaches. Japanese General Mitsuru Ushijima had enjoyed months to prepare elaborate defensive systems. Interconnected caves, tunnels, and fortified positions were designed to channel American forces into carefully prepared killing zones. This battlefield would demand sustained close-quarters combat, where individual weapons often determined personal survival. The American force included the entire 10th Army under Lieutenant General Simon Bolivar Buckner, Jr. This comprised the Army's 24th Corps, with the 7th, 27th, 77th, and 96th Infantry Divisions. The Marine 3rd Amphibious Corps included the 1st and 6th Marine Divisions. These units carried over 15,000 M1911A1 pistols into combat, nearly one weapon for every 12 combat troops. Ammunition supplies included 10 million rounds of 45 ACP cartridges, reflecting hard-learned lessons about ammunition consumption rates during prolonged operations. The Japanese 32nd Army, reinforced by naval troops and conscripted Okinawan civilians, represented Japan's last cohesive military force outside the home islands themselves. Officers carried Type 14 Nambu pistols, but ammunition shortages had reached critical levels by this stage of the war. Documents captured from the Japanese 62nd Division indicated ammunition allocation of only 20 rounds per pistol for the entire campaign duration. By contrast, American forces carried 21 rounds per pistol as basic individual load, with unlimited resupply capability available from massive stockpiles. The initial landings on April 1, 1945, Easter Sunday, and April Fool's Day met surprisingly light initial resistance. Ushijima had withdrawn his forces from beach positions to prepare defensive lines in the island's interior. However, when American forces encountered the Japanese main defensive positions at Kakazu Ridge on April 9th, the battle's true character emerged immediately. Fighting devolved into savage close-quarters combat, where distances were measured in feet rather than yards. Survival often depended entirely on who could bring effective firepower to bear fastest. Individual weapon reliability became a matter of personal life and death. Technical Sergeant Beaufort Anderson of the 96th Infantry Division earned the Medal of Honor on April 13th during the desperate assault on Kakazu Ridge. When his unit was pinned down by intense enemy fire, Anderson single-handedly attacked multiple Japanese positions with grenades and small arms fire. His official citation notes that he eliminated 25 Japanese soldiers in close combat during this action. Witnesses reported Anderson used his M1911A1 extensively when Japanese soldiers emerged from concealed spider holes at point-blank range. "The 45 saved my life a dozen times that day," Anderson stated later. "When they popped up from holes right under your feet, there was no time to swing a rifle around into position. The 45 knocked them down instantly, every single time." Japanese forces conducted massive counterattacks throughout the prolonged battle, culminating in Operation Tengo on May 4th. Ushijima launched his entire strategic reserve in a desperate offensive designed to drive American forces into the sea. During this attack, close combat became general across the entire front lines. Marine Private First Class Harold Gonsalves of the 4th Battalion, 10th Marines, received a posthumous Medal of Honor for evacuating 45 wounded Marines under intense enemy fire. Witnesses reported Gonsalves carried his M1911A1 in one hand, while dragging wounded men with the other, firing at Japanese infiltrators who approached his casualties. The cave networks of Okinawa presented combat challenges unlike anything seen before in the Pacific Theater. Japanese forces had spent months transforming natural limestone caverns into deadly fortresses. These weren't simple holes in the ground. They were sophisticated defensive systems with multiple chambers connected by narrow passages. Underground tunnels snaked between different cave systems. Hidden firing ports allowed defenders to shoot without exposing themselves. Storage areas held ammunition and supplies. Living quarters housed entire squads. The caves formed an underground city of death. American forces discovered that standard infantry tactics failed completely in these spaces. Rifles became useless burdens in the tight confines. Bayonets couldn't be maneuvered effectively. Machine guns were too bulky to carry through narrow passages. The caves demanded close-quarters weapons. The M1911A1 pistol emerged as the perfect tool for this underground warfare. Marines and soldiers learned to rely on their sidearms more than their primary weapons. The caves transformed pistol carriers into the most effective fighters. Marine Corporal Donald Honus served with the legendary 1st Marine Division during the cave-clearing operations. His unit faced some of the most brutal underground fighting of the entire war. Every cave presented deadly challenges that tested equipment and courage equally. Honus described the standard procedure for cave assault. White phosphorus grenades went in first. These weapons burned away oxygen and created choking smoke. The goal was to force defenders deeper into the cave system or make them surrender. But surrender rarely happened. Japanese defenders preferred death to capture. The white phosphorus served mainly to disorient and blind the enemy temporarily. After the grenades detonated, the real work began. Marines entered with pistols drawn and flashlights ready. The combination of the M1911A1 and portable illumination became the standard cave clearing kit. Nothing else worked as effectively in the cramped underground spaces. The pistol proved ideal for this nightmare work. Honus emphasized the weapon's devastating power in confined spaces. The concussion from each shot was amplified by the cave walls. The sound alone was stunning to defenders. Tactical lights became essential equipment. Marines taped flashlights directly to their pistol barrels. This allowed them to illuminate targets while keeping both hands on their weapon. The light beam showed where the bullets would go. Movement in the caves meant instant decisions. Shapes appeared suddenly in the darkness. Friend or foe had to be determined in split seconds. The flashlight beam revealed targets. The trigger was pulled immediately. The .45 caliber bullets had devastating effects in the underground fighting. Japanese soldiers were blown backward into cave walls by the impact. The heavy projectiles carried enormous stopping power even at close range. Technical analysis later proved why the .45 ACP dominated in cave warfare. The subsonic velocity meant less muzzle blast and flash. Shooters weren't as disoriented by their own gunfire. They could maintain accuracy for follow-up shots. The heavy bullets retained their momentum through equipment and gear. Japanese soldiers often wore multiple layers of clothing and carried packs. Lighter bullets might be deflected or slowed. The 230-grain projectiles punched through everything. Post-war ballistic studies provided scientific proof of the .45's superiority. Gelatin testing showed larger temporary wound cavities than any other military pistol cartridge. The tissue damage was immediately incapacitating. This stopping power was crucial in cave fighting. Wounded enemies could still detonate grenades. A Japanese soldier hit, but not immediately disabled, remained extremely dangerous. The caves amplified every threat. Sugarloaf Hill became the symbol of Okinawan cave warfare at its most intense. This small elevation anchored the entire Japanese Shuri defense line. The position seemed insignificant from a distance. Up close, it revealed itself as a fortress. The hill was honeycombed with interconnected caves and tunnels. Japanese engineers had created overlapping fields of fire. Every approach was covered by multiple hidden positions. The defenders had months to prepare their killing ground. The 6th Marine Division drew the mission of taking Sugarloaf Hill. The attack began on May 12th and continued until May 18th. 6 days of continuous fighting. The casualties were staggering for such a small piece of ground. Over 2,000 Marines were killed or wounded taking this single position. The hill measured less than 500 yards across at its widest point. Every square foot was paid for with blood. 17 separate assaults were launched before the hill finally fell. Each attack involved small groups of Marines crawling up steep slopes under fire. They had to clear caves one by one with pistols and grenades. The fighting occurred at handshaking distance. Marines and Japanese soldiers could look into each other's eyes before shooting. There was no room for hesitation or mercy. Kill or be killed was the only law. Marine Sergeant James Stevens survived the Sugarloaf Hill fighting. His memories of those 6 days remained vivid decades later. The conditions were beyond anything training had prepared them for. Rain fell constantly during the battle. The hill turned into a sea of mud. Marines had to crawl through knee-deep muck to reach enemy positions. Equipment became clogged with dirt and debris. Japanese soldiers emerged from hidden positions right among the attacking Marines. Combat became a series of individual duels. Rifles jammed with mud became useless clubs. The pistol remained functional. Stevens emphasized how the M1911A1 continued working despite the conditions. The weapon's loose tolerances allowed mud and water to drain out. The simple design had fewer parts to malfunction. Reliability meant survival. He witnessed firefights at distances measured in feet rather than yards. Marines and Japanese soldiers shot at each other from close enough to shake hands. The Marine with the .45 caliber pistol always won these encounters. The Japanese small arms failures became critical as the battle continued. Their weapons couldn't handle the conditions any better than their soldiers could handle the American firepower. Colonel Hiramichi Yahara served as operations officer for the Japanese 32nd Army. His post-war memoirs provided insight into Japanese weapon failures during the Okinawa campaign. The picture he painted was one of complete breakdown. The Type 14 pistols had become almost useless by late May. Ammunition was nearly exhausted from the constant fighting. Those weapons still functioning often failed due to rain and mud contamination. American soldiers seemed to have unlimited ammunition for their powerful pistols. Japanese officers watched in amazement as Marines reloaded repeatedly during firefights. The Americans never seemed to run out of bullets. The stopping power difference was obvious to Japanese observers. American pistols could kill a man instantly, even with peripheral hits. Arms or leg wounds from .45 caliber bullets were often fatal. The massive trauma was beyond medical treatment. The monsoon season beginning in mid-May turned all of Okinawa into a swamp. Foxholes filled with water faster than they could be bailed out. Weapons were submerged repeatedly in the fighting. The M1911A1's design allowed it to function despite water immersion. Drainage channels let water flow out of the action. Loose manufacturing tolerances prevented parts from binding when wet. The pistol could be dunked and still fire. Marines learned to protect their pistols by keeping them inside their shirts when not in use. Body heat helped prevent rust formation on metal surfaces. The weapons stayed relatively dry against their skin. The Type 14's enclosed design trapped water and mud inside the action. Tight manufacturing tolerances meant that any debris caused jams. Once contaminated, the pistols became completely non-functional. Ammunition quality became another critical factor as the campaign progressed. American logistics provided consistent high-quality cartridges throughout the fighting. Every bullet performed to specifications. Japanese ammunition manufactured in 1945 showed catastrophic quality control failures. Bombing had disrupted production facilities. Material shortages forced the use of substitute materials. The results were predictably disastrous. American ordnance units tested captured Japanese ammunition after the battle. The results revealed the extent of Japanese manufacturing collapse. 30% of cartridges misfired due to faulty primers. Velocity variations exceeded 300 feet per second within single production lots. Some bullets barely had enough energy to exit the barrel. Others generated dangerous overpressures that damaged weapons. Case head separations occurred regularly from brittle brass casings. The cases would split when fired, leaving the rear portion stuck in the chamber. This jammed the pistol completely until manually cleared. Squib loads were common where bullets lodged in barrels after firing. The next cartridge fired could explode the barrel and injure the shooter. Many Japanese pistols were destroyed by their own defective ammunition. The Japanese conducted their final organized resistance in the Kian Peninsula, at Okinawa's southern tip. This area contained the densest concentration of caves on the entire island. The fighting reached its most primitive and brutal level. American forces brought every weapon to bear against the cave complexes. Flamethrowers sent jets of burning fuel into tunnel entrances. Demolition charges collapsed entire cave systems. Small arms fire suppressed any movement. The 96th Infantry Division alone expended 450,000 rounds of 45 ACP ammunition during June. This exceeded the ammunition consumption of many divisions during entire European campaigns. Every bullet was needed. Private First Class Desmond Doss provided unique testimony about pistol effectiveness during the Okinawan fighting. As a conscientious objector, Doss refused to carry weapons himself, but he witnessed countless close combat engagements while treating wounded. Serving as a medic with the 77th Infantry Division, Doss saw combat from a different perspective. His job was saving lives, not taking them. This gave him objective insights into weapon effectiveness. Doss stated that the difference between American and Japanese pistols was like night and day. He watched Japanese officers empty their pistols into American soldiers who kept fighting. The small bullets lacked stopping power. When American soldiers hit Japanese with .45 caliber bullets, the enemy went down and stayed down. Doss credited the pistol with saving many American lives. The immediate incapacitation prevented wounded enemies from continuing to fight. The battle statistics from Okinawa tell the story of American material superiority at every level. American forces suffered 12,520 killed and 36,631 wounded. Japanese losses were catastrophic. Approximately 110,000 military deaths plus 100,000 Okinawan civilian casualties. The 10-to-1 kill ratio in America's favor reflected superior firepower across the board. Naval guns, artillery, aircraft, and individual weapons all contributed to this overwhelming advantage. But in close combat, where individual weapons determined survival, the M1911A1's superiority multiplied American effectiveness exponentially. The final accounting of pistol production reveals more than mere numbers. It exposes the fatal delusion of Imperial Japan attempting to fight an industrial war with artisanal production methods. The comparison is staggering. American factories produced 1,878,742 M1911A1 pistols between 1941 and 1945, 4 years of wartime production. Japan managed approximately 400,000 Type 14 pistols over nearly 2 decades from 1926 to 1945. This 4.7 to 1 production ratio during just the war years understates the true disparity. Quality, standardization, and ammunition supply all favored America by even greater margins. The industrial gap was unbridgeable. American production methodology revolutionized manufacturing processes. Companies that had never made firearms achieved remarkable efficiency through innovation and engineering excellence. The learning curve was steep, but the results were spectacular. Remington Rand's Syracuse plant converted from typewriter production to pistol manufacturing. The transition seemed impossible initially. Office equipment and military weapons required completely different skills and equipment. But American industrial engineering proved adaptable beyond Japanese comprehension. Remington introduced broach rifling that cut perfect barrels in single passes. Traditional cut rifling required multiple passes and much more time. Statistical process control developed by Walter Schuhart and implemented by Western electric engineers maintained tolerances while dramatically increasing production speed. Quality actually improved as quantity increased. By 1943, Remington Rand produced 1,000 pistols daily with fewer than 1% rejection rates. This output exceeded many Japanese arsenals' monthly production totals. The scale was beyond Japanese imagination. The learning curve demonstrated American industrial adaptability at its finest. Colt had decades of experience manufacturing the M1911 design. They required 1.2 man-hours to produce one pistol frame in 1942. Remington Rand started from zero firearms experience, but by 1943 they achieved 0.8 man-hours per frame through superior industrial engineering. The student had surpassed the master through better methods. Ithaca Gun Company introduced fixture designs that reduced machining setups by 60%. These innovations were shared with other manufacturers. Competition drove cooperation in the national interest. Parts interchangeability was absolute across all manufacturers. This represented a manufacturing achievement that Japanese industry never approached. Every component from every factory fit every pistol perfectly. In November 1943, Army Ordnance conducted a demonstration at Aberdeen Proving Ground. 100 M1911A1 pistols from different manufacturers were completely disassembled. All parts were mixed together randomly. Armorers then reassembled the pistols blindfolded using randomly selected parts. All 100 pistols functioned perfectly when testing was completed. This interchangeability proved crucial for depot-level maintenance. Field units could assemble functional weapons from parts of damaged ones. Japanese Type 14 parts, even from the same manufacturer, often required hand-fitting. Mass production was impossible with such tight tolerances. The economic efficiency was staggering when production costs were analyzed. In 1942, the unit cost of an M1911A1 was $31.42. This included materials, labor, and reasonable profit margins. By 1945, improved production methods reduced costs to $15 per pistol, less than half the original price, despite wartime inflation driving up material costs. Volume production achieved remarkable economies of scale. The Japanese Type 14, requiring extensive hand-fitting, cost 78 yen throughout the war. This equaled $31.20 in 1941 exchange rates. But it represented a far greater portion of Japanese industrial capacity. Ammunition production dwarfed weapon manufacturing in both quantity and importance. American factories produced approximately 3.5 billion rounds of .45 ACP during World War II. The scale was unprecedented. This equated to 1,862 rounds for every M1911A1 manufactured. Sufficient ammunition for extensive training and combat consumption. Japanese production was pathetic by comparison. Japanese 8mm Nambu production totaled approximately 100 million rounds from 1926 to 1945. 2 decades of production yielded only 250 rounds per pistol. By 1945, combat units allocated 20 rounds per pistol for entire campaigns. Quality control revealed fundamental philosophical differences between American and Japanese approaches to manufacturing. Every American M1911A1 underwent rigorous proof testing, with high-pressure cartridges generating 30% over standard pressure. Barrels were air-gauged to ensure dimensional consistency within thousandths of an inch. Function testing required 100 rounds fired without malfunction. Random samples underwent 5,000 round endurance tests. Metallurgical analysis ensured proper heat treatment and material composition. Hardness testing verified that components would withstand combat stresses. Every pistol met identical specifications regardless of manufacturer. Japanese quality control was minimal before the war and essentially disappeared by 1944. Late-war Type 14s show tool marks, dimensional variations, and soft metal that would have failed any reasonable inspection standard. The supply chain comparison was equally telling about industrial capabilities. American manufacturers received specialized steel alloys produced to exact specifications. SAE 4140 steel for barrels and 8600 steel for frames. Carbide cutting tools, themselves products of American industrial superiority, maintained precise dimensions through thousands of machined parts. Tool wear was predictable, and replacement was scheduled systematically. Japanese manufacturers by 1944 used whatever steel was available. Captured Type 14 pistols show frames made from recycled ship armor. Barrels were fashioned from artillery brass. Springs came from salvaged automotive parts. Subcontractor networks multiplied American manufacturing advantages exponentially. Specialized companies produced components to exact specifications. Each firm focused on their particular expertise. Grip manufacturers included Colt Plastics Company, Franzite Company, and Keys Fiber Company. They produced millions of synthetic grips impervious to tropical conditions. Standardization ensured universal fit. Spring manufacturers like Wolf Company and Associated Spring Corporation provided consistent springs heat treated for specific tension requirements. Every spring met identical performance specifications. Magazine contractors, including Seymour Manufacturing and Risden Manufacturing, produced magazines to tolerances ensuring universal fit. Any magazine would function in any pistol from any manufacturer. Japanese production remained vertically integrated within government arsenals. This limited production capacity and prevented specialization benefits. No component exceeded the capability of the weakest manufacturing link. Training ammunition allocation demonstrated different national priorities regarding soldier preparation. American forces allocated 240 rounds per man for basic pistol qualification. Advanced training received 500 rounds. Combat units received 100 rounds monthly for sustainment training. Total training expenditure exceeded 500 million rounds. Soldiers arrived in combat thoroughly familiar with their weapons. Japanese officers purchasing their own ammunition typically fired fewer than 100 rounds annually. Many arrived in combat having fired their Type 14 fewer times than American Marines fired in single training sessions. This training disparity showed in combat performance. American soldiers instinctively knew their weapons' capabilities and limitations. Japanese officers were learning their pistols' characteristics while under fire. Replacement rates revealed harsh combat realities that logistics had to address. American forces replaced approximately 15% of M1911A1 pistols annually due to combat loss, damage beyond repair, or excessive wear. The industrial base easily supported this attrition while simultaneously increasing total inventory. Production exceeded losses by comfortable margins throughout the war. Japanese forces couldn't replace combat losses at all. Units that lost pistols to combat damage simply went without replacement weapons. The industrial base couldn't support combat consumption. By Okinawa, many Japanese officers carried swords exclusively. Their pistols had long since failed or been lost. The feudal weapon replaced the modern one through industrial inadequacy. The Pacific War's final accounting revealed truths that transcended technical specifications or production statistics alone. In history's largest naval war, fought across millions of square miles of ocean and thousands of islands, weapons superiority reflected national character. The M1911A1's dominance over the Type 14, Nambu, represented American industrial democracy's triumph over Japanese military feudalism. Democratic values produced superior weapons through superior methods. The mathematics of terminal ballistics were inexorable and unforgiving. The 45 ACP's 230-grain bullet at 830 feet per second delivered 370 foot-pounds of kinetic energy. This energy created temporary wound cavities exceeding 4 inches diameter in ballistic gelatin testing. The tissue damage was immediately visible and consistently lethal. The 8mm Nambu's 102-grain bullet at 1,065 feet per second generated only 256 foot-pounds of energy. Wound channels were barely larger than bullet diameter. This 44% energy advantage translated directly to stopping power in combat. The ability to immediately incapacitate an enemy before they could continue attacking. Mathematics determined survival, but raw energy alone didn't tell the complete ballistic story. The 45 ACP's heavy bullet retained velocity better over distance. It maintained 89% of muzzle energy at 50 yards versus 76% for the 8mm Nambu. The larger frontal area created 98% greater tissue displacement. More tissue damage meant faster incapacitation. The subsonic velocity eliminated ballistic crack that could disorient shooters in confined spaces. The straight-walled cartridge case extracted reliably from fouled chambers. Extraction failures could disable a weapon completely. Reliable extraction meant reliable function under combat conditions. Every measurable technical parameter favored the American cartridge design. Bullet weight, velocity, energy, sectional density, and ballistic coefficient all supported superior combat performance. The weapons themselves reflected their ammunition's characteristics perfectly. The M1911A1's robust construction, weighing 39 ounces, empty-absorbed recoil while providing a steady shooting platform. The single-action trigger braking at 4 to 5 pounds enabled precise shot placement under stress. Consistent trigger pull was crucial for accuracy. Double-action triggers were harder to control. The grip safety and manual safety prevented accidental discharge while allowing instant readiness. Safety was important, but couldn't compromise speed. The M1911A1 balanced both requirements perfectly. The 7-round magazine held one less round than the Type 14, but could be changed in seconds. More importantly, the pistol would still fire its chambered round without the magazine present. The Type 14's attempted advantages proved illusory under combat conditions. Its lighter weight at 32 ounces made recoil harder to control effectively. Muzzle flip degraded accuracy for follow-up shots. The heavy, gritty trigger pull degraded accuracy significantly. Consistent shot placement became difficult under stress. The safety location required two-handed operation that wasn't always possible. The magazine retention spring made reloading nearly impossible under combat stress. Fingers couldn't manipulate the mechanism reliably. The magazine disconnect safety transformed magazine damage into complete weapon failure. Every supposed improvement actually degraded combat effectiveness when subjected to battlefield conditions. Good intentions couldn't overcome poor engineering decisions. Combat validation was overwhelming across every Pacific theater engagement. At Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Saipan, Peleliu, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa, the M1911A1 proved itself repeatedly in thousands of close-quarters engagements. Marines and soldiers trusted their lives to this pistol, knowing it would function despite mud, sand, salt water, or complete neglect. Reliability under impossible conditions was its greatest virtue. The psychological impact multiplied the weapon's physical effectiveness significantly. Japanese soldiers learned to fear the distinctive boom of the .45 caliber pistol. That sound meant immediate death was nearby. Post-war analysis by the United States Strategic Bombing Survey included extensive interviews with surviving Japanese officers. Their testimony revealed the psychological impact of American weapons superiority. Colonel Susumu Nishiura served as staff officer with the 32nd Army on Okinawa. His post-war statements revealed Japanese recognition of their weapons' inadequacy. The American .45 caliber automatic pistol was greatly feared by Japanese forces. It would knock a man down with hits to arms or legs. Japanese pistols required multiple center hits to stop an American soldier. This disparity in effectiveness was deeply demoralizing to Japanese forces. They knew their weapons were inferior. Fighting with inadequate equipment destroyed confidence and will to resist. Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kurebayashi commanded Japanese forces on Iwo Jima. His final report, written before his death, acknowledged American material superiority. American material superiority is overwhelming at every level. Their individual weapons, particularly their powerful pistols, give them great advantage in close combat where spiritual power cannot overcome mechanical superiority. This admission from an officer who had spent years in America as military attaché revealed complete Japanese recognition of their industrial inadequacy. Spirit couldn't stop bullets. The industrial disparity was truly insurmountable given Japan's resource limitations. American factories produced more M1911A1 pistols in 1943 alone than Japan manufactured Type 14s in 20 years of production. Over 600,000 pistols rolled off American production lines in a single year. Japanese total production over 2 decades barely reached 400,000 units. The comparison was embarrassing. American quality improved throughout the production run, while Japanese quality collapsed completely. American ammunition supply was unlimited, while Japanese forces hoarded every cartridge. American training was extensive and thorough, while Japanese training was minimal and inadequate. Every measurable parameter favored American forces by factors of 3 to 10 to 1. The human cost crystallized these technical advantages into battlefield results. Throughout the Pacific War, Marine and Army units armed with M1911A1 pistols consistently achieved kill ratios exceeding 10 to 1 in close combat. On Tarawa, 6,821 Americans died versus 21,000 Japanese. A 3 to 1 ratio, despite attacking heavily fortified positions. Superior firepower offset tactical disadvantage. On Okinawa, 12,520 Americans died versus 110,000 Japanese, an 8.8 to 1 ratio. While many factors contributed to these disparities, individual weapons effectiveness played a crucial role. Veterans' testimonies provided the final verdict on pistol effectiveness. Marine Gunnery Sergeant John Basilone wrote before his death on Iwo Jima about his beloved sidearm. The .45 automatic is the finest military pistol ever made. It hits like a sledgehammer and never fails to function. One shot ends any argument permanently. Technical Sergeant Charles Lindbergh of the 3rd Marine Division stated his opinion clearly. That pistol saved more Marine lives than any other single weapon. When Japanese soldiers got inside our lines at night, the .45 was what stopped them cold. Japanese veterans who survived American .45 ACP hits bore distinctive scars that marked them for life. Dr. Teruo Ueno treated veterans at Tokyo Veterans Hospital after the war ended. Wounds from the American .45 caliber pistol were immediately recognizable even decades later. The massive tissue damage created distinctive scarring patterns unlike any other weapon. Veterans shot with this weapon considered themselves extremely fortunate to have survived. The M1911A1's legacy extended far beyond World War II's conclusion. Special Operations Forces carried it through Korea, Vietnam, and into the 21st century. Its reputation for reliability was unmatched. The Type 14 Nambu vanished immediately after Japanese surrender, replaced by American weapons provided under occupation. No one mourned its passing or requested its return. Modern Japanese self-defense forces have never attempted to design indigenous pistols. They recognize the futility of competing with Western small arms development. American designs serve their needs. The broader implications transcended mere weapons comparisons. The M1911A1 represented American industrial democracy. Standardized, mass-produced, effective, and available to every soldier regardless of rank or personal wealth. The Type 14 represented Japanese military feudalism perfectly. Handcrafted, inconsistent, inadequate, and restricted to officers who could afford to purchase their sidearms privately. These weapons embodied their society's fundamental approaches to modern warfare. Democracy produced superior tools through superior methods and superior values. In the final analysis, the Pacific War validated the Thompson-Lagarde test's conclusions from 1904. In close combat situations, stopping power determines survival outcomes. The M1911A1 delivered that stopping power reliably and consistently. The Type 14 Nambu failed to deliver adequate performance even under ideal laboratory conditions. This disparity, multiplied across millions of individual combat encounters, contributed significantly to American victory. The mathematics of death in the Pacific War were precise and completely unforgiving. When Staff Sergeant William Bordelon charged Japanese pillboxes on Tarawa, when Sergeant John Basilone held Henderson Field on Guadalcanal, they carried weapons that would not fail them. When thousands of unnamed Marines and soldiers fought in nameless caves on forgotten islands throughout the Pacific Theater, they carried the M1911A1 automatic pistol, firing the .45 ACP cartridge with complete confidence. Every trigger pull launched a 230-grain projectile at 830 feet per second. This delivered 370 foot-pounds of kinetic energy, creating wound channels that immediately incapacitated enemy combatants. This simple equation of mass times velocity squared, divided by 450,240 determined survival in countless close-quarters engagements across the Pacific. The Japanese, Type 14 Nambu, firing its 102-grain bullet at 1,065 feet per second for 256 foot-pounds of energy, consistently failed this mathematical test of combat effectiveness. The production statistics told an equally decisive story of industrial supremacy. American factories manufactured 1,878,742 M1911A1 pistols during World War II alone. This production was supported by 3.5 billion rounds of ammunition. Japan produced approximately 400,000 Type 14 pistols over 2 decades, with perhaps 100 million rounds total. This 4.7-to-1 production advantage in pistols and 35-to-1 advantage in ammunition during just the war years represented industrial supremacy that no amount of spiritual power could overcome. But beyond mere numbers lay fundamental truths about modern industrial warfare. Victory belongs to nations that combine industrial capacity with engineering excellence. Nations that value individual soldiers' lives enough to equip them with the best possible weapons. Nations that learn from combat experience and systematically improve their tools of war through scientific methods. The M1911A1 embodied all these principles perfectly. The Type 14 Nambu represented the complete antithesis of these modern warfare principles. Inadequate design, poor manufacturing, insufficient supply, and obsolete tactical thinking. In the end, the Pacific War's outcome was determined by many complex factors: strategy, logistics, code breaking, naval power, industrial capacity, and atomic weapons all played crucial roles. But in those desperate moments, when combat reduced to its most primitive form, one man facing another at arm's length with death seconds away, the American Marine or soldier with an M1911A1 held overwhelming advantage. The thunder of the 45 ACP echoed from Pearl Harbor to Tokyo Bay. Each shot represented a small but decisive contribution to final victory. The M1911A1 didn't win the Pacific War alone, but in the brutal arithmetic of close combat, where individual weapons determined who lived and who died, it ensured that American forces held crushing advantages that multiplied across thousands of separate engagements. In this mathematics of survival, where stopping power equaled victory and mechanical failure meant certain death, America's M1911A1 .45 caliber pistol stood absolutely supreme. Japan's Type 14 Nambu was utterly, catastrophically, and fatally outgunned in every measurable parameter. The comparison wasn't even close. The last word belongs to Fleet Admiral Chester Nimitz, who understood the importance of individual weapons in determining victory outcomes. Our superior technology, including individual weapons like the M1911A1 automatic pistol, gave Marines and soldiers decisive advantages in close combat situations. When battles came down to individual fights at close quarters, American forces prevailed because they carried superior weapons that functioned reliably under the worst conditions imaginable. This technical superiority, multiplied millions of times across the Pacific theater, helped secure our ultimate victory over Imperial Japan.